And we are live, my friends, so take it away.
Okay, welcome everyone to today's panel on sources and using them. I am your moderator, Rebecca Lee, aka Goth Hobbit. So why don't we start with some panelist introductions? Let's see. Jane, how about we start with you?
Okay. Let me start the video up a moment. I was evicting a cat. Okay. My name is Jane Bigelow, and if you Google me, you'll need my middle initials M and H to distinguish me from the several other Jane Bigelows out there in the interwebs. But I am a primarily fantasy rather than science fiction writer, former librarian, amateur historian.
Okay, and Alan?
I'm Alan Pollock. I'm the guest of honor, artist guest of honor for the show, and I've been doing science fiction, fantasy art for 25 plus years, and doing a lot of work for Baen Books and Larry Correa's Monster Hunter series lately, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Sorry, I'm having an allergy attack here. Fred, how about you?
Hi, I'm Fred Poutre. I'm a game designer with Clovenford Games. I make board games, card games, and role-playing games. And in the day, I'm a math teacher.
Oh, sorry, I'm still a little sleepy here. Mr. Bradley, your turn.
Hi, everybody. I'm S.A. Bradley. I'm an author, a speaker, and a podcaster. I do Hellbent for Horror, which is a podcast about everything related to horror. I talk about art and social commentary through pop culture, through shadow work, if you want to call it that, by how horror basically takes our allegories and metaphors. Did the same thing in my book, which is Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. And I like to remind everybody that they used to love horror movies and they secretly still do. And I've been involved and immersed in horror and genre science fiction for about 50 years now. And since I was able to get a library card and start at A in Asimov and then just move all the way through. So thanks. It's wonderful to be here.
And, I am the moderator, Becca. I'm a little bit of the weirdo in the group because I don't do a whole lot of visual art anymore. I used to. But most of my historical work these days is done using lots of public domain primary source material. So a little bit of a different spin on things. So first question, artistic reference can mean many things. So how do you use it and how do you apply it? Jane, how about we start with you?
Well, I was at the very beginning of this, I was wondering, were they talking about things that you use to get you into the world that you're trying to write in, or were they talking about references in the writing? So I definitely use both visual and particularly music as far as, getting into the right mental setting for what I'm doing. My most recent book is set at a sort of variant on Versailles, and I know more about French Baroque music at this point than practically anybody who isn't a professional musician in the field, but it really helped. It settles you into that rather formal worldview.
Alan, what about you?
Well, I shoot a lot of models, photographs for any people-related art that I do. I use a lot of reference, actually. I used to have, well, actually I still do have, but I never use it, which is a full catalog of photo reference that I've collected over the years from National Geographic to, whatever, Guitar Player magazine, whatever, just any kind of reference, but I don't really use it now that the internet's around. So I'm constantly looking up reference for anything, because I have to draw things that are not actually real, at least as far as I know. But for me, anytime that I'm going to have people and creatures of any kind combined into a story, they all have to look like they belong in the same space. They all have to have the same amount of realism. So if you're using a photograph for a person, you have to really make sure that the creature kind of lives up to the reality of the person as well. So so that's what I use it for.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned drawing things that aren't there. I did a life drawing class several years ago now, and was busily sketching the model, and then added wings, because that's what you do, right? And the teacher came by and said, she doesn't really have wings, don't you? And I looked at him and said, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. So Essay, what about you?
Let me make sure yes. I used a lot in figuring out what my story is going to be like. So kind of an amalgam of what I've heard already. So when I'm writing things, I tend to take a little bit of, say, 4 or 5 different stories, movies, whatever, and try and come up with a general theme that usually goes through something that's happening in my life, or in politics, or in the social strata as it is. And so I get hooked on something. It could be a song. It can be a visual collage. And once that's in my head, little by little, everything that I start looking at seems to be part of that theme. And so I start collecting all of that in a book. Now I collect it in a file. I mean, back in the day, I used to have a scrapbook, and I would just take pictures kind of like out of National Geographic and things. Whatever the lighting was supposed to be in my head of something that I was doing, I would get that lighting or the color look. And all of this just to tell a story that nobody's going to even know any of that is in there. But I find that now I take a lot of visual cues from what I see on the internet in images, but music is a huge one. I think that storytelling for me and music are so deeply connected. And I think sometimes because we're dealing in fantasy and horror and science fiction, those things sometimes get past the cortex of logic and hit you in the stomach first and interest you and excite you in the same way that music does. So when you're so music allows me to get into those worlds pretty quickly. And sometimes that obsession takes me in really interesting places. Like I just wanted to talk about devil music in the 80s. And before you know it, I'm looking up Gregorian monks. I'm looking up broadsheets, I'm looking up murder ballads, and coming up with this weird pastiche that takes me all the way from the beginnings to modern rock and roll, and saying, you know what, Ozzy Osbourne had nothing to do with it. The Gregorian monks created devil worshipping music, so enjoy that on the tritone. So anyway.
That's fun. So Fred.
Gaming, to tell a story in gaming, you kind of have to give hints so that people put together the construct in their head and get the concept of the theme. So music all the time, when I put flavor text on cards, it's quite often a quote from a song. And if they know the song, I'm working on a game called Psychic Combat, and I use a lot of Blue Oyster quotes between Flaming Telepath and veteran of the Psychic Wars. I use those quotes all over the cards. I use Bad Moon Rising in a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. So flavor quotes from songs all over the place in any sort of game, whether it's a board game, card game, role-playing game. Visually, one of the pictures in the role-playing game has a picture of Seattle and has this girl with a cat man and a cactus man and this insect looking thing carrying an axe. So it's this whole Wizard of Oz sort of reference. Pictures. Another one for that one, we used the dogs playing poker with a bunch of dogmen sitting around playing poker. There's a lot of things like that you can just draw on and throw in there. And because people understand the reference, their eyes light up, and it helps them get the flavor of what's going on better, especially in a game setting.
Well, and I personally love it, talking about music and things like that. I love it when, visual artists draw on that kind of collective awareness of other, pop culture, because let's face it, all culture was pop culture at one time or another. And I love it when people draw on that or give me a, soundtrack that they were writing to, or a playlist or something like that. It just adds so much. And as for me, when, like I said, I do a lot of my stuff these days is mostly historical research, but even that plays in, because if I'm going to be doing a costume design and I need it based on a historical period, I'm going to really want to know that historical period well. So, it doesn't matter how I jazz it up, it still has to have the right bones. But then I can take those and play with them, and it's a lot of fun. So, next question, what are the pros of using an artistic reference? And I'm going to throw that open to what are the cons of using one as well? So, Alan, how about we start with you this time? Alan, I think your microphone's off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't touch anything, so I don't know how that happened, but
Don't worry
anyway,
about it. Alan Grant of touch screens, so I feel you.
When I first started out, I was heavily reliant on photographs. So what was happening, and this is like even once I was already working professionally. So when I got hired to TSR and was doing Dungeons and Dragons art, I was doing the same thing I'd done before I was professional. I was taking photographs of my models and using reference that I had collected for creatures and things like that. But what I was doing mostly with the people was I was taking the photographs and almost tracing them. So what happens when you use a photograph, even though you're taking it yourself, you own all the rights to it, all that kind of stuff. But what happens is, especially if you're using foreshortening, which I tend to do a lot, and depending on what the lighting is like, things can get blurred, things can get distorted. What happens with photo reference a lot is that the head of the human head tends to, for some reason, when it's photographed, looks larger than it really is. And so if you just trace a photograph, what you get is it doesn't look very heroic. It looks very much like, I don't know, it doesn't look natural almost, which is weird because when you look at the photograph, you don't think that. But when you actually trace it and go to if you just trace it and go to paint it, it just never looks right. And I did that for a while where I wasn't tracing it and render, like tracing, I would trace most of it. I would trace the landmarks, like where the nose and the eyes were. And then I would set the photograph aside and then look at the photograph and really draw it hard, from looking at the photograph next to me, but it had all the landmarks where they were supposed to be. And so it just, the people never looked quite the same as if you were to not do that, which would be to use the reference by looking at it, but really start with your sketch where you have more action and animation and energy and gesture going into it first. And then you kind of look at the reference and piece it in, look at your reference and say, oh, that my drawing doesn't quite look right. The arm wouldn't normally look like this. It wouldn't do that. The muscle's not in the right spot. The lighting, the light source. And so there's lots of things in the reference that are great, but if you overdo it, where you're just copying the reference, it really gets stiff. It really loses a lot. And, because of the lighting, especially if you're using really like moody lighting, a lot of things get really obscured where if you don't really know your anatomy well, you don't even know what you're looking at. You see lumps and shapes and you're just tracing it. And then when you go to painting, you're like, what is that? And you fudge it hoping that it's going to fix it. But the drawing, it just, you can't hide a bad drawing. So that's really the cons for me.
I wonder if some of that's related to the problem that you've had, this classic problem in taking photographs, where your eye normally doesn't perceive that the tree branch appears to be growing out of Aunt Maud's ear. But if you
Right.
look at it in a photograph, it'll be unintended hilarity.
Yeah. Hmm.
You naturally lose some of their depth perception with photographs, and they're better than they used to be. And so you get these weird things going on that in real life you can see the difference, but on a photograph just kind of loses it.
Yeah. And I think the same can be said for writing as well as doing photography or drawing. That the idea of a reference for me is somebody like, say, Harlan Ellison, one of the first folks that I read that really spoke to me. Now, there's a little bit of an Ellisonian kind of style that can be seen in my writing, but if you see it a lot, then I've used the reference a little bit too much. The reference is something that allows me to, I like to make it like there is a road. The reference is a road, but I don't want guardrails. So Becca, you spoke about having wings suddenly appear on a subject. And if you're going by reference and you take reference as dogma, you're not ever going to get to those wings. And I think a lot of what's really interesting about writing and what becomes your voice are the mistakes, the weird paths that you go off of where you're not being guided in. Yet I'm not inventing the paragraph. I'm not inventing the prose that is out there. I'm not even coming up with a voice that is never heard before. It is a mixture of all the loves that I've had, and that is the reference path. But if I'm going down certain things, I will look up a certain author and see where they went on that story and say, okay, that's great. And in fact, many times we have lexicon. You know, what someone has written becomes kind of the standard of what you think when you, it was a dark and stormy night. It was literally written at one point, right? We may joke about it, but that is a shortcut. And we never have to go to that stormy night again or reinvent it. So I think that that's some of the fun that there is in reference. You can really take in a lot of what has gone before you. But I always watch and make sure that I'm not a copycat, that where someone's just going to go, you know, I know where you're going. Yeah, I hear the rim shot before you even pick up the drumstick.
Yeah. So Fred, any thoughts?
Of course, one of the things you're always afraid of with using any sort of artistic reference is, are you going to offend the person that it comes from? And are they going to sue you over it? One of my writers for my post-apocalyptic game lives in California, lives in Southern California. And I'm like, use Disney. You have Disney World there. How awesome running around after the apocalypse in Disney World could be. And he's like, but I don't want to get sued. And I'm like, I'm the one publishing the book. I'm the one who has to worry about it. I'm like, don't scrub the serial numbers off. Leave them on there, please.
Even Disney can't completely squelch fair use.
Yeah, and that was
Try.
part of the argument, was whether or not that was counted as fair use. And I'm like, absolutely. It's something that exists in the real world. And we're trying to reference this world that was changed from that. That is totally fair use.
Oh yeah. And it's a lot of fun to, you know, look at a piece, whether you're reading or listening to a song or something, and just see where they've kind of taken the file to those serial numbers. It's like, are they completely occluded?
Okay. Good job, Peter.
And we're froze?
Rebecca just entered another round.
Yeah.
There she goes.
I can hear you folks.
Mike, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable.
Matches
Okay.
my mind.
I have nephews
Apparently
in the house. That's why I keep looking over there to see what they're up to.
There's another negative about using references sometimes. At least it's one that I have to watch out for. If I've gotten completely nerded out on a subject, I may think that I've planted information there. And my critique group has to come and tell me gently that there are like 10 people in the country who will pick up on that. So
Yes.
you do need to watch out for
Sometimes
that.
things can be a little too obscure. And then, yeah, so you have to have somebody tell you, you might want to do a little bit more info dumping here. Just a little. And yeah, I mean, look, there are definite downsides to using a visual reference. I mean, you run into the problem of how many other people have used it, and is it going to end up getting hackneyed? You know, you can only shoot the same point at the Grand Canyon so many times before, you know, before everyone goes, haven't I seen this Instagram already? So yeah.
That's
But
hard though. That's hard because when you're using like natural like landscapes or animals or whatever, I mean, most artists are not going out and shooting their own pictures of lions, you know, so it's like you're going to be using obviously someone else's photographs that you're looking at. It's the only way around it. So somehow you have to take that reference and transform it into your own, where someone doesn't look at it and go, oh, that's swiped from that photograph. And same thing with the Grand Canyon. I mean, millions of people have been there and seen it and taken probably the same shot. So like, at what point are people saying, oh, that's that Grand Canyon shot and not, you know, I wasn't there you know, on my own, I took the shot. It's kind of hard to say, you know. I mean, I have toads in my backyard all the time that I take pictures of, and what's stopping somebody from saying I swiped a toad from another reference? I mean, I don't know. It's tough.
so how does everyone find references? I mean, they're really all over the place. You just kind of have to look for them. So let's see. Oh, everyone switched positions. Essay, let's start with you this time.
Sure. I think when I start getting to where I want to write something, my problem is trying to stop references from appearing everywhere. I get into that weird mindset where everything is referencing what I'm thinking about. But when I'm trying to come up with something, an idea from the very beginning, it's kind of something that I learned as a kid. My dad was functionally illiterate and he realized I was not. And so he got me a set of encyclopedias as a young child. And it was the encyclopedia idea of potato chips. You look up one thing and then your eye gets caught by another word to the side or a photo or a picture. Before you know it, you're in a wonderful rabbit hole. But what that did is it got me to start really looking into reference. And so Jane, an ex-librarian, one of my favorite type of people, because they get guys like me who walk in, and back in the old days of having a library card, and that was it. You would just go in and start working your way through reference. And it was having an idea and then starting to get obsessed with whatever it is and learning to go down those paths. So now with the internet, it's really crazy and very easy to go down rabbit holes. But I find that I will look up things just by Google. Google is so good now with analytics that if I put in the most obscure thing like terrarium, fake foot, and suburban, something will come up. And it may be something really interesting. I have no clue. So I've actually done that, where I've gone down a rabbit hole of going, boy, you know, what do I want to talk about the Mojave Desert. And I want to talk about how weird it is that you're on this one strip of land and you can go so fast in Nevada, but then you have to change speeds in California. And is there a story there how nothing changes except the speed limit? How weird it is to be in this place where nothing looks different, and yet the laws change because your tires are spinning. And so I just got on Google Maps and started looking at all the pictures of what was happening on these small roads and how you never seem to get any closer to the Sierras. You know, they're just there looming like some crazy Death Star. And before you know it, I'm going down trying to figure out what neighborhoods are there, some of the laws. Now, does any of that make the story? Yes and no. It may never get there in detail, but it has flavored how I'm going to speak about it and gives me confidence to be able to write about it. And that's the thing. I'm making a universe for me so that I don't get called a fool or a liar by other people. The troll that's out there that knows everything about that road in California to Nevada. And I want to know. And so I find myself eating those potato chips habitually. And so right now, the internet is really that place. And I'm interested to see what the next best thing is going to be.
And oh yeah, the research rabbit hole. Many times I found myself not even at the bottom at 3 a.m. going, how did I get here? Fred, what about you?
I often send pictures to my artist, and sometimes it's other people's artwork, and I like this concept, or I look up armor, or I look up clothing, and I send artists a whole bunch of pictures from period pieces, and I'm like, no, we need something that looks more like this 1800s thing instead of that, which is a little bit more Middle Ages. One of the times I looked up a particular spot on a highway because I wanted this thing going on that particular highway because it was referenced in the game. Mm-hmm. And so I had to send the artist a picture of that highway so he knew what was going on with it and could make it more accurate. And that's where I pull a lot of the stuff from. Some of the other ones, like dogs playing poker, if you have dogmen, eventually somewhere that just pops into your brain, things that people know, even if they don't know what they are.
Right.
And you could just throw it in there and twist it a little bit. We did a boy and his dog reference because the boy and his dog, the actual movie itself, yes. But then you have Mad Max with his dog. And it's just like this huge post-apocalyptic theme of the boy and his dog. So we did a dog boy and his man thing on one of the pictures.
I like it. That's great. So Jane, how about for you?
One source that I have found amazingly helpful over the years is human resources. You find them out through our ever-loving internet, but it is, at least these days you do, there are associations of donkey raisers. And if you want to know, as speaking as a city girl who has never raised anything larger than a small dog and has very little idea of how these animals actually operate, you can write to them, and bless their hearts, they will tell you all sorts of things. And if they're laughing at you, well, they still answer the question. You can't see them laugh in emails, so that's professional Baroque dancers will take time out of their busy lives to tell you, no, you don't want that particular dance for the love scene because it trades off too much. You'd rather have this kind. And it's delightful. It's a source not to be neglected.
It really isn't. You know, if you give people half a chance, they will talk to you about their pet obsessions in detail.
Oh, yes.
I called my mom. One of my moms is a nurse, and I'm like, I need to know the difference between synthetic sutures and natural sutures and which ones are absorbative. And she goes, what did you do? And I'm like, I'm writing a game. It's for a game.
A lot of you may know my other half, Daniel Dvorkin, who at one point in his life was a medic, and a combat medic, actually. And we have a writer friend who lives down in Florida who regularly calls us up so that she can ask Daniel how to effectively hurt her characters. some of those conversations are a lot of fun to be in on. No, I have to give him head trauma, but I don't want to kill him. How do I do that?
Blunt force trauma, yes, always
Oh,
fun.
yeah. And then you can get into all sorts of fun things like, signs of serious concussion and brain bleeds. And I'm just so happy that our phone isn't tapped because people would be very worried.
I was a firefighter in the Air Force, and I got obsessed with shock, what happens to the body under shock. And I spent ridiculous amounts of time talking with other people about shock. And they must have been like, is this guy like trying to do some kind of torture dungeon? Why is he asking all of these insane questions about well, how about body temperature? What happens with body temperature? So I get it. And I love that. And I love what Jane said about talking with people, because I interview people a lot. And what I do is I say, help me fall in love with what you're in love with. Tell me what this is. What is it that excites you? Because I am really drawn as a genre person. It could be any genre. It can be anything that is fantastical. If I'm affected by your passion. That's what draws me to you. And so if I hear what your passion is and you are erudite about it, if you're eloquent in your words, if you're eloquent in your emotions about it, I'm immediately learning. And that's a lot of times how I find as well that I make fast friends in the genre world, to be able to ask questions and say, hey, you're living in this area. Tell me a little bit about the Appalachians, stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. And you get to talk, because we don't talk a lot, do we, artists? Sitting alone in our little spots.
So, well, it's not a list question, but it's just one that I think would be interesting to go into for a few minutes. Have you ever had someone come up and tell you how all of these things that you do, these sources that you take, the personal worlds you build for yourself, how they affect their enjoyment and their understanding of the either verbal or visual image you've created? So has anybody ever said, come up and said, hey, well, this little tidbit, it really made things for me, or this is so incredibly detailed, how did you manage this? Fred, how about you?
One of my friends who likes to play my games, my friends and family get abused because they get to play test my games. I had a hunting game, but it was sewer hunts. So we're down in there chasing albino alligators and things of that nature. And he was like, my friend was waiting for it, and he says, everything you do is completely logical. Your steps they build, and I know where it's going to end up sometimes because of that. And he really liked the fact that you could take a ridiculous premise and then just build on it logically and come up with that. And I've had a few of my game testers and people who played my games who have made comments of that nature.
Okay.
And I like Alan's work. I've seen Alan's work in some of his stuff from TSR and such, and
Thank you.
I really enjoyed some of his artwork in there. And some of them I'm like, ooh, I want to steal that. Oh, wait, I can't. You have been one of my references.
Okay.
Yeah. Alan, you were one of my rabbit holes this week, looking up your
kidding.
art. I was just like going, wow, look at this. So looking at your mixtures between fantasy, science fiction, and horror, it was really fun to see how it's all. Do you have a different style depending upon what genre you're in? Do you look for certain colors or textures that you go with whichever style you're looking at?
Not really, no. Usually the color is dictated by the time of day, usually the moon. If I can get a moon in the picture, I try to, it by all means. So if there's a moonlit sky, it typically dictates the color a lot of the time. But technique is, I started off doing traditionally oil paintings, and then somewhere along the line I switched over and started doing digital. I do both now. So my approach with the digital was to try to make it look like I painted it with oils, and I think I've sort of accomplished that. I don't know if it's fully there, but so there might be a slight difference for the, for viewers when they see it. They might say, well, this looks different than this, and maybe that's what it is, that one's digital and one's not. But I don't know. When I looked at my, I set up the print shop over the past week, and when I look at the images all lined up as a mix of digital and traditional, I don't really see too much of a difference until you really blow them up. If you enlarge, if you had it on your screen and you really like zoomed in on it, you might see, oh, that looks digital. But I use Corel Painter a lot, and Corel Painter is really good at mimicking real brush strokes. So I think it does a pretty good job of it, but I'm sure there's a difference. But as far as other than that, I don't really, approach it any differently, really. And just try to have as much fun as I can with it, and make it look as cool as I can. And that's about it.
And it's delicious.
What made you go down that rabbit hole anyway?
I was looking up your work, and
okay.
I also did a kind of marketing videos for this on social media. So I was trying to promote the people who were involved and guests of honor. And so I was like, well, I just want to see what you've got. And it was a lot. And it was really, really exciting, because I figured you'd be interesting on this panel, because there were some positions of bodies that I could almost sense the humidity of the model. It was like there was just this, they felt very, very real. I could almost see like you going out in the woods and saying, just sit on this log, whatever it is. And the way that the body and the face was really, really exciting. And I found myself just kind of going down the path of, well, here's something, obviously he doesn't know any werewolves. So, or perhaps he doesn't know any werewolves. And I'm going, that's really interesting, structuring it in your own way. And then there are the pinups. I'm going, well, I almost feel like I know this person. Was this done in San Francisco? And so it's a really interesting thing that I was taking a look at your technique and your style and the energy, and just potato chips, man. It happens to me all the time.
Me too.
Something rocks me and boom, I'm gone.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Jane, what about you?
One of the nicest, a couple of the nicest compliments that I've had on my writing were the short story I'd done where the main character was a weaver, and somebody said, so what are you working on now on your loom? Because
nice.
I got it right enough that, and for that it was, I don't weave, but I know people who do, and I talk to them about things like, okay, when you put in a long session at the loom, where does it hurt?
It's always nice when someone who does something that you don't, but you have reason to display knowledge, thinks that you're knowledgeable enough that they think you're also in the biz. It's like, oh, hey, that's really cool. That's a nice compliment. I suddenly don't feel like quite so much like I'm just holding a clipboard and trying to look like I know what I'm doing.
But the other was, I don't do art. My visual art talents are, shall we say, limited. But I do maps. If I've got something that takes place over any substantial distance, it avoids doing the fantasy equivalent of somebody going from Denver to the Grand Canyon and back in a day. You don't have a private jet or teleportation. So I've got my very first novel that got published, Talisman. It has a city in it called Zakend. And one woman was just really crushed to learn that she could not actually go there. Oh, that's beautiful. God, I got that one right.
So the next of the questions up here is, how do you shape your references creatively to ensure that you're not just copying something? And here we come to the necessity of keeping a full set of files for all of those pesky serial numbers. So, see, Jane, I think it's back to you for the hot seat.
Okay, so how do you avoid just copying? Well, of course, sometimes in fiction, you're trying to just copy. You're trying to set it in an actual place and you want to get it right because if you've got the donut shop on the wrong side of the street, somebody will notice it. If you're borrowing from real sources, that gets a little dicier for a fictional location. I mean, I enjoyed going through Bujold's Chelian books, Curse of Chelian and Paladin of Souls, because I could spot some of the historical references. I knew who she was working with, and it didn't bother me. She changed it enough. And I guess that's the key is, you change it enough. And who decides that is one of those things that you could talk about until 3 a.m. anytime you want to.
Oh, yeah. So, Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I think that last thing she said is really what it comes down to, is changing it enough. I mean, if it's somebody that posed for me, I don't really have to worry about it so much because they've already given me permission to use them, and no one really knows them. But what I do with that is I try to make, for me, I was growing up and still am, but very influenced by Michael Whelan, and mainly beyond his skill and technique was he was one of the guys that when you looked at his cover, it represented either the character or a scene from the story. Like, he's really good at capturing the character. And I remember reading in one of his art books that an author contacted him and said, you nailed that character. It's exactly how that character is supposed to look. And I thought that was the coolest thing. So for me, that's always been my goal when I do a book, is I try to capture the characters, even though I'm using my own people to pose for them. I try to look at the detail, the reference, however they're described in the book, and make it look like those characters as much as possible. That was always important to me. So I do change my photo reference as much as I can, instead of just making them look like the pictures that I took and making them look like the people that I know. I try to make them look like the characters in the book as much as I can, as long as there's enough detail in the story. If I'm using other reference that I find, whether it's on the internet or Pinterest or whatever, Google or Pinterest, whatever, then it comes down to, like I was saying before, if it's an animal or anything, it could be anything, nature or texture of a wall or whatever. I try to change it enough. Like Jane was saying, I try to change it enough that someone can't say he just copied that photograph and put it in his painting. And the thing is, usually what I do when I'm looking for reference, I've already done the rough sketch. I've already done a pretty, it's not as rough. They used to be really rough sketches. They're a little tighter now as far as my drawings go before I go to referencing. So what I'm trying to do is plug reference into my sketch. And so I might have it at a certain angle of this, this creature, I need this lizard, let's say, for a dragon. So you have to look up lots of different body parts. So trying to find the reference to fit the drawing is very challenging sometimes. So I'm not really copying a whole picture from somebody. I'm usually using a leg or part of the head or, part of this, part of that, and I'm piecing it together and redrawing it so that it fits into what I already sketched out. So that's how I get around, there's no way someone could say, oh, we took that little part of that scale there from this, lizard. So, I know going into it, if I completely copy somebody's photograph, there's a chance, maybe it's remote, but there's still a chance that someone could say, I just saw that picture on, on Google, and, so I don't want somebody to, tell me that I stole something. So I'm pretty careful about it.
I would say that there's also sometimes you want that reference to be known by the audience for the sake of allegory, or just getting the emotions that are associated with that thing. There was I don't know, have any of you watched, I'm assuming everybody watched Mr. Robot, because I just assume everybody gets into things that I do. But there was this, basically, there's this storyline where the entire industry, the entire financial industry collapses because of hackers. And there's this one moment where they are talking to the head of a bank, and he's agitated and fidgety, and he's live on TV, and they're asking him questions. He goes, "This is never going to fix itself." And he pulls out a gun and he shoots himself on screen live, right? And the way that he jerks and blood starts pouring out of his nose, I go, oh my God, they are referencing a real life incident. And it was R. Bud Dwyer back in the late 80s, shot himself live after being caught. So did they know that? Yes. What were they trying to do? They were making me immediately think of the last time that there was a financial collapse that nearly destroyed the country back in the late 80s. It also reminded me of that visual image of this guy shooting himself and the shock of it. So younger audience, not going to get it at all. But the people of my age, all of a sudden, I'm feeling the sickness and the dread. People like Wes Craven for Last House on the Left used some Vietnam footage that was very well known, so that you would feel that. A lot of times we want to take people emotionally to those spots of things that actually happened. I think a lot of times there are remnants of emotion that happen with images, and especially when they've happened to us or in our historical time. And I think that kind of is something that I want to get a lot of times, which is why at times I write chapters that are named after Warren Zevon songs or heavy metal songs. I want to get you in a certain spot. If you know the reference, you're going to be a little bit closer to me during the journey. And I like that. And I think that's one of the great things about allegory and why genre is so important, because we get to talk about things that are socially relevant that normally people would be fidgety if you started talking about straight. But if you talk about it in an allegorical way, if you come around the corner in some fantastical way, it is palatable. We have the distance, that safe distance of genre to keep us from feeling or smelling the burning tire smell that happens when you get too pedantic, like I can be often.
It's an occupational hazard. So, let's see, Jane, I don't think you've gotten a chance to speak on this.
Repeat the question, because I've been busily thinking away about some of the other answers.
So how do you shape the reference creatively to ensure that you're not just copying?
Oh, okay. We are still on that one.
Kind of, sort of.
Almost, it's almost hard not to do that. I mean, your own emotional reaction to a reference and your own use of it in the story will change how it shows up. It's something that when you're doing straight nonfiction can be hard to avoid. Just to be, really scrupulously accurate is a difficult thing. But I think, part of the whole alternate history fun is saying, well, what if we change this little detail? And I think that applies on a smaller scale to your references. You say, okay, she couldn't possibly get the knife up that fast, but if we change the angle, or if we make her a little taller,
Okay. So it looks like we still have some time. I've been checking the chat to make sure there aren't any audience questions. It doesn't seem like it so far.
Yeah, I just answered one. I just saw it pop up. So
show it for me.
Something about one of my paintings about a creature coming through a window. That's the only one that I saw.
Oh, okay.
Where are the questions coming? Are they on Twitch or?
You have to click up in, like at the top of my screen, there's a section that says more. When you click on that, there's a window and it says chat. So unfortunately, it doesn't just appear on the screen.
Well, yeah.
On mine, I've got a little chat thingy down underneath the image of whoever is speaking. I've got mine set on speaker view.
Well, here's a personal question of mine. What are some of the favorite references that you've used? What sticks out in your mind as a reference that you've used that just, it's one of those that's kind of stuck with you after a number of years, and you go back and look at what you made from it and you're going, yeah, that was a good call. Alan, what about you?
Well, that's a tough question for me. Yeah, I honestly can't think of anything that stands out like that. I've had good models that were really, really great at posing and things like that. But because I mix and match so many different things to make the image, I'm never really taking one reference and saying, oh, this was, even if obviously you have to change it no matter what, but I never really took, I can't think of one thing that I took and said, this is so important, because I piece together so many different references usually within a painting. So maybe somebody else has a better example of that.
We do have an audience question from Valerie, who wants to know if you create digital or hand rendered art foremost.
It's about 50-50. Yeah, oil paintings and digital using Corel Painter.
I don't do any of my artwork directly because my artistic talents are very limited. I'm really good at getting an idea of a concept, and I tend to clip together with clip art and paint, and then hand it to the artist and say, make this look pretty. And it looks horrible put together with clip art, but once the artist gets a hold of it and turns it into real art, usually the concepts come across really nicely that way.
Are you using Corel on a PC or a Mac, Alan?
Mac all the way.
Okay. And you have some sort of a tablet that you draw on?
I do. Whether it's pronounced Wacom or Wacom, I'm not really sure, but yeah, that's what I use. And you don't need a big one either. Like I had a really, like I don't know what size it was, 6x9, something like that. And then I had to upgrade to a new one because of, the OS that I'm using. But the one that I bought right now is quite large, and you don't need to spend the money on a large one. It's a waste of money. Something 6x9 size is really all you need. So.
Nice. And Becca, would you repeat your response for the Twitch stream, please?
Oh, yes. When I was still painting and drawing more than I am now, I was almost exclusively hand drawn. I did a lot of colored pencil, acrylic. Every once in a while, I diverge into charcoal or pastel. These days, I'm mostly behind a camera lens, but I keep hoping that one of these days I'm going to get back in. I've also done a lot of, other kinds of creative things. In a previous career, I was a professional bench jeweler / silversmith. And I've also done carved leather work. So yeah, I've got a lot of, things that I've done over the years. I just haven't done anything recently enough to still really consider myself a visual artist. Let's see. Jane, have you gotten a chance to
I don't really have much to contribute to that because, as I say, my visual artistic talents are minimal. I do little kind of stick figure type sketches sometimes when I'm having trouble blocking out a scene and making sure it makes sense, or I do maps, but nobody is ever going to want to see my.
I was
I have a
going to ask, do you actually draw your own maps?
Yeah, they're pretty rough, but they're enough to tell me what I need to know for the timing and the pacing.
Okay.
No pencil sketches.
So, Essay, do you use any visual tricks to help you with your writing, like, map sketching or positional reference or anything?
That's interesting. First off, cartography is hot. I love that. Anything to do with maps is awesome. So I guess someone just asked the question of what do you mean by learning your story? So kind of answering this, I mentioned in the chat that I use charcoal and pen and ink. I do kind of cartooning as well, but it's like Don Martin style stuff, old Mad Magazine. But these days, a lot of it is digital photography, and learning my story is basically I've got this earworm in my head one more time of an obsession, and it's going to become a story, and I need to find out what it is. And a lot of times I'll walk the streets of San Francisco and look for things that textures, colors, people, and I eavesdrop and I take photos. And that, weirdly enough, is how I get into my story. It's kind of like I'm sneaking up on my own story. I find these textures and things become like a palette for me. And I definitely out in the woods. I go out in the woods in the Oakland Hills here, and you can find yourself in a semi-secluded way, even though you're surrounded by 8 million people. And so I find that I start taking nature porn. I just try to get as deep into everything that I can in nature and textures. And before you know it, I'm starting to think while I'm taking the photos, and I'm starting to get the story crystallized in my head. It's a hard thing to really articulate because it's not necessarily I'm doing a thing on mushrooms. It's not necessarily that I'm doing something on bark, but being around those textures somehow organize my mind, organize my thoughts. So sometimes it's very literal. It's a person, and that person's going to make it into the story. But other times it's just a feeling, like a tone of music. The beginning of A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles, that chung, that's opportunity, man. And every time I hear that, it takes me on an imaginary story. It's a great way to jump into something. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think so. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Checking to see if there are any more audience questions.
I have a quick question if there's nothing that comes up for the writers. When you're writing and you say whether it's based on somebody you know or not, do you ever feel like when you're writing about a character and it's like a crazy character, somebody who's very violent, someone who's a murderer, rapist, something crazy where like awful things happen to people? Like, I'm a big Stephen King fan, so that's where I'm coming from. Do you ever get concerned about people that actually know you thinking that where are you getting these ideas? Is there something wrong with you? Like, why would you think of these things? And like, how dare you say those things? And like the language you're using, like all of that kind of stuff. Like, do you ever feel like, I don't know if I could put this out there because people are going to think bad things of me?
Jane?
Well, I'm thinking actually of something that Diana Gabaldon said one time, that one of her villains, Jack Randall, is a thoroughly despicable human being, a sadist, a manipulator. He's bad. And someone was talking to her about what an awful person that was, and how she didn't know how Diana had ever even dreamed him up. And she said, I finally told her, you don't realize you're talking to Jack Randall, do you? artists, visual artists, may do something of the same thing, where you can be going through a horrific scene. Someone you love can be going through hell, and you're feeling it. You're not, isolated from it, but there's a little part of your brain that's taking notes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I feel. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
Because my day job as a teacher, I have to have a certain amount of respectability in that. And so sometimes I'm writing a game or writing a little snippet for a role-playing game or something, and my brain goes off as, what if one of your students sees this? And I kind of have this brain seizure moment. But normally I just go with it anyway, because those are very different aspects of me. And I tell my students all the time, filter yourself. How you behave here has got to be different than how you behave with your friends, than how you behave at work, So I think most middle schoolers, high schoolers, I think they're mostly understanding about that.
Well, I think that's it for the time. SA was asking if we had a chat lounge or something for afterwards, and I believe that would be the con suite on Discord. So
Perfect.
if anybody wants to show up there afterwards and discuss things and just kind of generally keep the vibe going, I hope everybody had as much fun with this one as I did.
I'd love to chat more. Shutting me up is the big problem. So I guess Discord is.
Like I said, occupational hazard. Well, and so let's see, how do we get there? So I think, Fred, what you have to do is pull up Discord, and yeah, there's a Discord link on the main MileHiCon page, so you can get there through that link.
Would that be the Pandora Discord? Because I'm on Discord, so I'm not sure which one we should go to.
There should be a
Is there a green room?
in the channel list to the side. I think it's here. Let me hold on just a second.
I believe it's Pandora. I think Pandora, because we're in Pandora. Hi.
Pandora is the programming one. Let's see. Okay, so if you look down on the sidebar on the left side of Discord, there should be a 10 forward.
Yes.
Section, and general is kind of the general con suite, and then there's also SF chat and fantasy chat.
Wonderful. So I'll go to. I keep saying MileHiCon 52 is saying Pandora. So I guess that's where we should go.
He said
the chat.
He said the one that says general or SF chat is the ones. Those two.
Yeah, under the 10 forward section.
Okay. I got it.
Okay, so we want to go to general, folks? I guess general's probably.
Yeah, I'm going to take a quick break, but I'll be there in a minute.
Yep, I'll say hi to everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks.
Oh, I've had fun.
Fine, go to general. I think we're supposed to go to Pandora, but we'll go to general.
Thank you, and thank you all, and see you in the chat room at some point.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.